The mid-2000s, it's something a lot of us remember. Punk music like My Chemical Romance, Fit for Rivals, Red Jumpsuit Apparatus. I mean, yeah, I grew up with that kind of music, and I definitely had my punk phase around 2009, which went to 2012. And then, we also had the launch of Xbox 360 in 2005, and the PlayStation 3 in 2006. And then, of course, PC gaming in the mid-2000s. Now, PC and console gaming were a bit different in the mid-2000s. Compared to today's world in the 2000s, it was really expensive to build or buy a PC that had enough power to really push those games at higher resolutions like 1024 by 768, 1280 by 1024. And back in the mid-2000s, 800 by 600 and 1024 by 768 were common resolutions if you had decent specs at the time. And generally, you were trying to hit 30 FPS, and some of you were probably trying to hit at least 20. Growing up in the late 90s and 2000s, I had a PC with a Pentium 4 running at 2.6 GHz on Socket 478, which was a Northwood CPU, with 512 MB of DDR memory running at 400 MHz, and a GeForce FX 5200. Yeah, that one. And so a lot of my games were typically ran at 480p or 800 by 600, as my card at the time was equivalent as a person not being able to lift a piece of paper. And speaking of the FX 5200, I'm just going to give a quick shout and link to Budget Builds official's video on the FX 5200, which I wholeheartedly recommend to watch to understand what I mean about this card. After the conversations in Discord about the FX 5200, I just couldn't help but bring it up. Now, what I've gone and done was build what would have been a mid-range PC from early 2006. I mean, sure, I have a high-end Core 2 Quad Extreme system, but I wanted to build a PC more so of what would have been more appealing in early 2006 for the money. Now, what we got here to start with is an Intel LGA 775 motherboard that I got years ago. It has 2GB of DDR2 800 MHz RAM and a Pentium E2200 clocked at 2.2 GHz, coming from the Carnrow architecture on a 65nm node. It has 2 cores and 2 threads with 1MB of L2 cache, definitely not the fastest CPU, but it's enough for the games, which I would have been playing at the time. Well, I didn't really get to play a bit of them until my PC upgrade in 2009. But, you kind of get the point with that FX 5200. With the graphics card, I've gone with the Sapphire Radeon X1650 Pro with 512 MB of video memory, my model specifically being the 128-bit DDR2 variant. It's an RV535 GPU of the R500 architecture with 12 pixel shaders, 5 vertex shaders with 4 ROPs and 4 TMUs, all on an 80nm node, with the GPU being clocked at 600 MHz and the video memory being clocked at 700 MHz, 1400 MHz effective. It has a max support for DirectX 9.0C and Shader Model 3.0 for those at the time with fancy shaders. The card only draws 44 watts on the PCI Express slot. To me, this sounds like a decent amount of muscle from a card that doesn't need a 6-pin auxiliary connector, which there is a surprise to how it runs one game, which you'll see later in the benchmarks. And now, for the extra stuff. In this PC, I also have a Sound Blaster Live SPO100 sound card, which in my opinion is a really good sound card until you start playing later games, and it seems to have some sampling issues. Maybe the sound card doesn't like how some later games handle audio, or maybe it's something else. I'm not 100% sure. And of course, I've gone and put Windows XP Service Pack 3 on here to make it a proper Windows XP machine, as many would have taken Windows XP over Vista back in 2006. And it was installed to a 250 gig hard drive. If I had this PC back in 2006, I would have been one really happy camper. Even in 2008, as most newer games of that time required Shader Model 3.0, my FX 5200 couldn't hardly push anything without graphical artifacts, let alone push anything on DirectX 9 and Shader Model 2, as you had to run most of things with DirectX 8 mode, because otherwise it ran very poorly. I'm sorry. The 2000s really brings out my least favorite memories of that card, Because I ran that card until around mid-2008, and then I had a Radeon 9600, which replaced until about 6 months later, and then I got a brand new PC, which I'll talk about in another video at some point. Now that we have all of this laid out, it's time to test some of my favorite games of the 2000s, and see how this PC would have handled them. Unlike my FX 5200 that couldn't handle Sorry, I keep doing it. You know what? Let's just roll them out right now.